My name is Paul McClintock, and this is a session on Robert's Rules of Order and Parliamentary Procedure. This is a basic. Next month we'll have an advanced class. There is a handout, 4 pages, on the table for you, and we will be using it heavily. There is a goldenrod reference sheet, which we might make mention of a time or two, but it is not critical for tonight. It is a publication of the National Association of Parliamentarians. We will mention briefly some information in Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, 2nd edition. And if you don't have one, and I don't see any that are at a table to collect or pick up tonight here, that's not a big problem. The PowerPoint itself handout is not available tonight, but will be made available by email to Steve SPEEA, and he can make that available to attendees. That would be sometime starting tomorrow. I'll probably email that to him tonight. With that said, give you a little bit of background here to Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order was first written, first edition came out in 1876, written by Henry Martin Robert, who was in the Army Corps of Engineers. He eventually became a general before retirement, and he had experienced a grueling meeting where he was asked to preside in New Bedford, Massachusetts, that he was ill-prepared to preside at in terms of knowledge of parliamentary procedure to make the meeting efficient and effective. It's a 14-hour meeting. I think it had to do with a community meeting dealing with civil defense of the city. And as a result, he decided to learn parliamentary procedure himself. Years later, when he was in California, he experienced a lot of frustration at the various civic meetings he was a part of, because being a gold rush melting pot of all the other states, people had lots of different ideas on what the procedure should be. And they spent way too much time arguing about procedures and not the substance of what they were an association for. And sometime later, it wasn't in California, he actually started writing and published a 176-page book that we now call Robert's Rules of Order. It has evolved over time. It got a little bit bigger, not much, by the 3rd edition. And it is now in its 11th edition, and the 12th edition is being worked on as we speak. They seem to, starting around the 7th edition, be coming out with a new edition every 10 years, roughly. Starting with the previous edition to this, the 10th edition, the authors, obviously Henry Martin Robert is now deceased. I believe the 4th edition was the last one he worked on, but it was actually published after his death. And then his family and heirs have kept it going since then. And the current authorship team includes his grandson, Henry Martin Robert III. But in addition, Daniel Hahnemann, Thomas Balk, Daniel Siebold, and Shmuel Gerber. So these are, by the way, just as an aside, the National Association of Parliamentarians, who produces the goldenrod sheet, reference sheet, every 2 years has a convention, and just last weekend it had a convention. No, let's see, it's the weekend before last. It had a convention in Chicago, and I think in 2 more years it may be in Vegas or someplace else. But at that convention, I presented 2 workshops, and at one of those, one of the authors, Shmuel Gerber, was one of the 10 members of the second workshop, which was a small group. Years ago, at another national event, I gave a workshop on bylaws, and I looked out there, and Henry Martin Robert III and Thomas Walsh were in my audience. So they go to these things, our national conventions, and participate in the educational program, sometimes giving them, sometimes just sitting in the audience of them. And I've enjoyed seeing Thomas Balch as a presenter as well. Now, with that said, it's important to understand the broader picture. There are other books besides Robert's Rules of Order on parliamentary procedure. This is another that's in print currently. There's a lot that aren't in print anymore. But this is the American Institute of Parliamentarians Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure. Thinner, smaller. It's not as encyclopedic. It doesn't cover all the cases that Roberts does. And it handles some things differently. We've talked about the original edition, and the in brief second edition corresponds to the current 10th edition of the actual rule book. This in brief is not the rule book, but it is in complete accord with it. It just simply is acknowledging what is often considered the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the time you only need 20% of the information. And so this covers most cases, but and it has the page numbers to go to the thicker book when you need to for more information. There are a number of books that parliamentarians call knockoffs. The 4th edition is the latest edition that is no longer copy protected. And so there are a lot of entrepreneurial folks who will take the uncopy protected 3rd or 4th edition and republish it with Robert's Rules of Order, famous name, on the front. But they have, this one is with a new guide and commentary by Rachel Vixman. I've never met Rachel, don't know if she's still alive, but just as one example of how someone tries to make a little money off of the non-protected versions, copy-protected versions. If you are wanting to have a rule book on Robert's Rules, you can find a cheaper knockoff, but it's really not the authoritative book that you need for your meetings. The authoritative is the 11th edition, and that's the one you would want to make sure you get. Don't get snookered into getting something that's not really the rule book for your group. With that said, we are going to start with a practice meeting script. I don't know if Wichita has the handout. Does Wichita have the handout?
Yes, we do.
Very good. So we will have 5 people needed. A chair, a secretary, a treasurer, a campaign chairman, member A, member B, and recounting that, it looks like 6 people are needed. Do I have some volunteers for any of those? What would you like to be?
Any one of them.
Okay, let's start with chair. Who wants to be the chair? Okay, and your name?
TJ.
PJ.
T.
Oh, TJ. Secretary. Nice short one. Name?
Joel.
Joel. Good to see you again, Joel.
Yes.
I won't recognize all the faces, but Joel's I did. All right, and who would like to who would like to be treasurer? Surely someone likes money around here. Okay, and your name?
Gordon.
Gordon. Thank you. And campaign chairman? Yes? Yes? It's all scripted. All you have to do is read the script.
Okay,
Okay, and your name?
Michelle.
Member A and member B. Member B's got an easy job. I think it just says the word second a couple of times. Member A. All right? Amir. And someone, you don't even have to get up to the mic to holler out second. You can stay at your chair. The rest will have to actually come up to the microphone up here to do the role play.
I'll be member B.
You'll be member B.
Sounds like it's right up my alley.
Okay, repeat your name again.
Tony.
Tony, thank you. All right, TJ, Joel, Gordon, Michelle, Amir, take turns speaking into the mic. That's the only way Wichita is going to hear us as we go through this.
Excuse me. Thank you.
I will pause a time or two during the script, which lasts about a page and, let's say, about 2 pages and a fifth, and make some commentary on the material just illustrated. So, TJ, you have a gavel there? Go ahead.
Excuse me. The meeting will come to order. The secretary will read the minutes.
The regular monthly meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The meeting is adjourned at 5:30 PM.
Are there any corrections?
Microphone isn't working,
Mike
TJ.
isn't on.
Might start.
Okay, I'll start over.
Thank you.
No worries. The meeting will come to order. The secretary will read the minutes.
The regular monthly meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The meeting is adjourned at 5:30 PM.
Are there any corrections? Since there are no corrections, the minutes are approved as read. The next business in order is reports from officers and standing committees. Will the secretary report the communications we have received?
Local 1234 sent us a thank you note last week for our publicizing their public campaign.
Thank you. Will the treasurer please report?
We have $2,000 on hand on August 5th, as reported at the previous meeting, with $300 received and $400 expended since that time, leaving a September 5th balance of $1,900.
Are there any questions for the treasurer?
Let's pause at this point and talk about some of this. The gavel, as you can see in the script on line 16, is to be rapped once here at calling the meeting to order. Robert's Rules of Order actually says the gavel is to be seldom used, and it is optional. You can have your meetings without a gavel at all. One tap is all that Roberts ever talks about, and also specifically says if things are getting a little disorderly, don't go bang, 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 bang with it to try to get the attention. A single tap and maintaining calmness and whatever volume your microphone projects is what should be bringing the meeting to order. It can be used to open or close the meeting and to call a meeting into recess or to announce it going into recess and to call it back to order after a recess. It can be dropped on the floor. That's an inside joke at this location. It can be used to call members to order. So if, for instance, someone is interrupting another speaker in the middle of their speech, the chair can tap the gavel and say, "The member will please come to order and not interrupt the speaker." It can be handed to a temporary chair. So if the chair, the president, for instance, wants to speak and debate on a motion, he should relinquish the chair, and so that the person presiding over that motion is seemingly neutral and has that position of neutrality. And so the vice president or vice chairman would then preside, and the gavel would go to the person presiding. It is not handed to someone giving a report. They give their report, but the chair conducts the business of adopting that report or whatever the recommendations from it. And so the chair would maintain the gavel and is responsible for maintaining the order if there's any disorderliness, not the person giving a report. Any questions on the use of a gavel? Okay, moving on to the issue of minutes. Minutes are not usually read if they have been pre-distributed, and with today's technology, that's almost always, in my experience. Is that your case? Okay. When the minutes have been pre-distributed, it is sufficient to simply say that the minutes have been distributed. Are there any corrections? You do not need to say, are there any corrections or additions? Any addition is a correction. You would ask, is there any objection to the correction if a correction is offered? If there is a objection, someone says, no, that was so-and-so that made that motion, not the one that's in the minutes just read, then that would be an objection to the correction. And if there can't be quickly and obviously a unanimous consent to what is the correct thing to put in the minutes, then there would be a vote, and it would be treated like an amendment, such as, I move to amend the minutes by striking out John and inserting Sue. All in favor of adopting that amendment or correction to the minutes, say aye. All opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the correction is made. Normally, however, most corrections are obvious and universally acknowledged for anyone who has any opinion on the matter, and then they are adopted in essence by unanimous consent. Any member has a right to offer a suggestion for a correction. A couple of points in particular. If a person was absent from the preceding meeting, they may see that they are recorded as having attended it. They can obviously offer a correction to the minutes in that regard. Even if they were not a member at the time of the preceding meeting, they may notice that the year is the wrong year. This is a January meeting, and someone forgot to change the year. They're in the habit of the previous years, and they noticed it, no one else did. They can make that correction, even though they were not a member at the time of the meeting. If they are a member at this meeting at which you're making the correction, they have a right to offer corrections. There's no motion needed to approve minutes. Minutes are inherently a requirement for meetings. And since they're inherently required, it is an assumed motion, and it is simply a matter of getting all the corrections that are needed, and once there are no more corrections, then you simply declare them approved as corrected. There's no vote needed to approve them. Any questions on minutes? The next thing that we'll talk about is called the Standard Order of Business. There's a acronym, Mrs. Sun, MRSSUN, that is helpful to remember the 6 standard items of business. Items is probably not the correct word, the 6 categories of business. Each category may have more than one motion. Each motion is an item. The first of those, the M for Mrs. Sun, corresponds to minutes approved. And you saw that illustrated in the script so far and how it was done. The next is reports of officers and standing committees. And we've already seen the secretary and the treasurer giving a report. The interruption of the script is just before a campaign committee report. The script does not identify whether the campaign committee was a standing committee or a special committee. But the second category of the standard order includes all the officers and all the standing committees, and the next one is for special committee reports. A little bit of explanation. If you have minutes for more than one meeting to correct, the longest to go one, those minutes are approved first, and then in chronological order. If you have multiple officers to give reports, they report in the order that they are listed first in the bylaws. If you have multiple standing committees to give reports, you give them in the order they're listed in the bylaws. That's the standard. If you have some special need to change that up, you just get unanimous consent to change the order. But the plan on the standard order, you'd follow those rules. When you get to special committees are ones that are not created by your bylaws, but they're created for some special situation that once that situation's resolved, they no longer exist. It could be, for instance, that some important person from DC was going to be in town, and you wanted to have an event, and you created a special committee to plan that event. Well, once the event's over, and they've given their final report on the recommendations, and then your assembly adopts it, then they're done. They don't have any need to meet again. They've already done their work, and they're automatically dissolved upon giving their final report. So they are created out of the blue whenever the need occurs. If you have several such committees that need to report at this meeting, then they report in the order in which they were created. This is just standard order of business, and this is trying to establish the rules for deciding what that order would be. The next category is called special orders, and the next one includes general orders. These are things that have been scheduled for this meeting by the assembly. Normally, a chair, president, will prepare a draft agenda knowing a bunch of things that need to come up, and if these are not business items that are stemming from an officer's report or a committee report, they would go into either, until they're approved by the assembly, and if it's not coming from one of those other groups, then they would all be new business. But if the assembly decides to have this business scheduled for this meeting, it would be a general order. But if they want to give priority attention to some of those items by a 2/3 vote, they can make it a special order, and it comes before the general orders. Now, most general orders are a result of postponing something from another meeting, the previous meeting. So at one meeting, something comes up, and someone moves to postpone this to the next meeting. Well, in the next meeting, it'll come up under general orders. The other way things get to be general orders is typically by adopting a draft agenda at the beginning of the meeting listing things that have not previously been voted to be part of this meeting. And those are automatically, once the agenda is adopted, even if they're listed under a heading of new business, they become general orders. Because the assembly has said we're scheduling those for this meeting. Any questions on that? Unfinished business, which is the first part of this last one currently listed, unfinished business is at the preceding meeting, if you had some general orders, for instance, that you didn't get to and it got so late you had to adjourn, then you'd scheduled them for then and they were not reached, and so they are now unfinished business and they come before any general orders for the current meeting. All right, with that said, the final one is sort of the open floor, out of the blue, new business. Any questions on the standard order of business? How many of you have heard the acronym Mrs. Sun to help you remember that? 1, 2, okay. I've taught this course before, and I see some people remember a few things. Very good. In the Robert's Rules of Order newly revised in brief, on page 13, it talks about standard order of business, and it gives a simplified standard order of business with 4 items instead of 6. Reading and approval of minutes, that's the first one. It just says reports, and it sort of lumps 2 of those items together. The second and third that are on the screen are lumped under simply a heading called reports. And then unfinished business, so they skip over the special orders. And that's because most of the time you don't have them. And then new business. So that's a simplified version. There are one category of special orders that are common, and you don't have to vote by 2/3 to have them, and that's if your bylaws prescribe something to occur at this meeting. So if you have an annual meeting at which you have to have elections, technically they are special orders. Okay? With that said, we're going to talk next as we look through the script, and my apologies for not inviting the participants in the mock meeting to resume your seats and complete your meal, but we'll have a few minutes. But continuing then, there's a report of officers discussion. There was a point in this standard order business where the chair said on line 27, will the secretary report? And again on line 32, will the treasurer please report? So when officers give reports, we've already mentioned that they're called on in order listed in the bylaws, but they're also called only if the chair knows that they have a report to give. If you're an officer, you should let the chair know that you have a report to give. And the chair can also take the initiative to ask each of the officers if they have a report to give. But a lot of that is done by history and habit. So if by history and habit officers don't typically have reports, then the chair doesn't have to every time ask them. But if any change from the norm is to occur, be sure you're communicating so that you are called on. The next comment here is that reports come in a couple of types. One is informational and one is with recommendations. And a report can have both. The recommendations should come at the end, and the officer reporting should say, I recommend, and they outline, in essence, the body of a motion. And then some member from the floor is to move the motion. Is there Committees are done differently. Committee reports, the reporting member actually moves it themselves. But if it's an officer report with a recommendation, they only make the recommendation, they don't make the motion. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll cover in a moment when we get to, I believe, the committee reports, what goes into a report. But proceeding here, I guess I had it there already. What goes into a report? Ask yourself, what do the members need to know to decide on business for this meeting? Do they, are you making a recommendation to them? Certainly your recommendations or your motions would be needed to be part of your report. Or is there background information they need to know that will help them make a decision? And that's what goes into the report. There's unfortunately a lot of time wasted on things that they don't need to know. And it helps to streamline the meetings to concentrate just what do they need to know and give that. Any questions on that? Okay. A treasurer's report. What does the assembly need to know, once again, to make decisions at this meeting? Such as how much money is available to spend. If you're going to maybe have a motion, a new business item, or any other motion, do we have the money to spend? Is this going to impact something else that it's needed for? Is it in the budget? So those are part of it. Some groups are simple and small enough that the sample treasurer's report that is shown is adequate, where you give the amount of money that was available last month or the balance in the bank last month or last meeting, how much has come in and how much has gone out since then, and doing the math, how much do we have now? Now this is not to be audited, it's simply informational to make decisions, financial decisions at this meeting. Do we have the money to make a $2,000 scholarship contribution to whatever? And so that is a typical kind of treasurer's report for a small, simple organization like a PTA. If you're more involved with a line item budget to where you want to give a printed copy of a budget and where we are year to date, and what's not spent in the budget year to date, that can also be done for something that's more involved. Sometimes that information isn't handed out, but the treasurer may want to make sure they have that information handy in case questions come. The next important comment here is there is generally not a vote on approving the treasurer's report. It's extremely common to see this inappropriately done. But the thing that you do approve is an audit of the treasurer's report, and that's typically once a year or after a change in person holding the office. And the audit, so the treasurer should only spend money they're authorized to spend. And if and an audit is in essence double checking to make sure that that's how all the money was spent. It's also making sure that all the money that was supposed to go into the coffers actually got there and not into the treasurer's pocket. And so some mistakes, some errors are accidental and some errors are intentional. And so the question of intent is another issue. But the audit is looking first and foremost, are there mistakes? But once, since things are supposed to be authorized, if you approve a treasurer's report without an audit, you've just authorized it. And the mistakes could be there, but you just authorized it by approving the report. And that's why you don't have approvals of treasurer's report. You have an audit outside of the treasurer looking over the books, verifying that everything that's done is in order, and they make a report that it's been audited and found correct, and then there's a vote on that. Any questions? Okay. Moving on from the treasurer, we talk about committee reports. And although it's not been modeled in the model script yet, we're going to talk about this one, and then we'll resume with the model, the mock meeting. Committee report, again, has informational and recommendation parts. The recommendation, again, like in an officer's, a report would come at the end of the report. A motion from the committee doesn't need a second. It's assumed that the committee has, unless it's a committee with just one person, and that's pretty unusual in most groups, but if you only have one person, it does need a second. Any committee with more than one person, it's assumed that there's two people in support of this business coming before the assembly. So no second is generally needed. Standing committee reports, in order that they're listed in the bylaws, we talked about that before, but only if they have a report, just like the officers. And special committees report in the order in which they were created if they have a report. Any questions on that? Then let's have our participants resume the role playing, and we are going to pick up on, we'll repeat line 38, starting at line 38.
Are there any questions of the treasurer? Hearing none, next is the campaign committee report.
The campaign committee met on September 6th and interviewed candidates for the election in November. By direction of the committee, I move that we endorse George Washington for state senate.
It is moved that we endorse George Washington for state senate. Are you ready for the question?
Member A? Who's member A?
Mr. Chairman,
The chairman recognizes the member.
I move to amend the striking out George Washington and inserting Benjamin Franklin.
second.
It is moved and second to amend the motion by striking out George Washington and inserting Benjamin Franklin. If the amendment is adopted, the motion would be that we endorse Benjamin Franklin for state senate. Is there any debate on the proposed amendment? Member A?
I speak in favor of amendment because Benjamin Franklin would better represent our interests. I urge the member to vote for the amendment.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment to strike out George Washington and insert Benjamin Franklin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
The ayes have it. The motion is adopted, and the main motion is amended to read that we endorse Benjamin Franklin for state senate. Is there further debate on the main motion as amended? Hearing none, the question on the motion that we endorse Benjamin Franklin for state senate. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it. The motion is adopted, and we will endorse Benjamin Franklin for state senate.
Let's pause here. Thank you. Go ahead and sit for the moment. Thank you. We see that the campaign committee chairman made a report with some information on line 42 and then followed it with a motion on line 44. We see that when the chair stated the motion on line 47, the chair did not say it is moved and seconded, because this came from a committee and there was not a request for a second, and so the chair simply said it was moved. We see that the chair, after repeating the motion, that's called stating the motion, that the chair said, "Are you ready for the question?" That's the formal language prescribed initially, traditionally in Robert's Rules of Order. What it means is, a motion is a proposal, a question is, the question is, shall we adopt the proposal? So the terms are used a lot interchangeably, question and motion. But when the wording says, "Are you ready for the question?" that means, are you ready to vote on the question of adopting the motion? That's a little bit jargonish. And so it's common to hear, "Is there any debate?" instead, because this is really opening up that phase of processing a motion called debate. Some folks like to use the words, "Is there any discussion?" That's not a phrase that Roberts prescribes or even talks about, I don't think. I think he, and only in the recent last, or maybe 2 editions ago, brought up the option to say, "Is there any debate?" This last phraseology on line 49 is not in Roberts either, but that's what I think is the most clear, and it's, "Are you ready to vote?" And "Are you ready to vote on the question?" There's a couple of comments about the pros and cons of these various ones. "Are you ready for the question?" might leave some folks that are not experienced in meetings wondering what in the world you're talking about, and maybe they want to debate it, but they don't understand that this is now the time to do so. On the other hand, if you invite debate or discussion on something that doesn't need it by asking, "Is there any debate?" or "Is there any discussion?" It may prolong a meeting unnecessarily. It may not need to have any debate, and you're taking up time unnecessarily with it. So there's pros and cons to those. Moving to the next page. This is an example of a motion on line 53 to amend the pending main motion. So there's several, let's see. During debate, you can debate pro and con, speaking for or against. You can request information, such as, is George Washington still alive? You can move to amend, refer, or postpone as examples. There's other things you can move, but the debate phase of processing a motion includes not just speaking pro and con. It includes these other steps as well. Debate speeches under Roberts can be 10 minutes long. Some folks, lots of groups think that 10 minutes these days is too long to listen to a speech and debate. That was actually very limiting to the speeches and debate back in the 1800s. Things have changed. Tweets and text messages, we now are accustomed to trying to say everything in 140 characters or less. The motion to limit debate speeches to 2 minutes each, for example, could be made. It would take a 2/3 vote, but that's during the debate itself. These motions are available. During a debate, you could also have a motion to recess or even to adjourn. There are several ways to make a motion to amend. Amend simply means change the motion that's pending. One of those is by striking out some of the words in that motion. As an example, if there was a motion to buy a new gavel, and sounding block, someone could make the motion to amend by striking out and sounding block. If that were adopted, you would only have the motion left to buy a new gavel. You can also have a motion to insert. If you have a motion to buy a new gavel, you could have a motion to amend by inserting the word oak in front of gavel. Is it clear to everyone? You can also have a motion to strike out and insert. So if you had a motion to buy an oak gavel, the amendment might be, I move to amend by striking out oak and inserting maple. If you insert words at the end of the motion, it's called adding. So if you are having a motion to buy a new gavel and you wanted to put and sounding block, then that would be, I move to amend the motion by adding and sounding block. It works if you say by inserting at the end, but adding is a little shorter. And then finally, there's a term called substitution, which if you strike out the whole paragraph of a long resolution or motion, or the entire motion, then, and you're inserting another paragraph or a replacement motion, that is called a motion to substitute. Does that help? If by chance you have a 10-page document called bylaws and you want to replace the entire bylaws with a whole new set of 20 pages of bylaws, or 8 pages, whatever it is, the new set is a complete replacement of the old. That is a motion to substitute, but that kind of a replacement is called a revision. You normally just amend bylaws piecemeal, but if you're doing a wholesale replacement, it's called a revision. And that's a different kind of an amendment. That's amending not something that's pending, that's amending something that's been previously adopted. There's other rules for handling that kind of thing. Okay, the processing of the motion to amend is, the chair says, it is moved and seconded to amend by, and then they'll say striking out or inserting, or striking out and inserting, and explaining where in the motion that would be. Then the chair would secondly, now it's not a breaking of rules for the chair to not follow this pattern. It's highly recommended by Ann Roberts, and it's extremely sensible because the chair's job is to make sure that the membership knows what's going on. This set of, this pattern of explaining what you're doing with an amendment is designed for that purpose, and it's well thought out. It works. So you start off, it is moved and seconded to amend by inserting, and then you go on to if the amendment, and you can see this illustrated on lines 58 through 62. It is moved and seconded to amend the motion by striking out George Washington and inserting Benjamin Franklin. And that second bullet, if the amendment is adopted, the motion would be that we endorse Benjamin Franklin for state senate. People see the effect of the amendment. And the third part, shown on the screen as well, is there any debate on the amendment? So that people understand now we're restricting the debate to just the amendment. We're not going to debate the whole motion. You might be against endorsing anyone, but if you're going to endorse someone, you don't know what the vote will be on that part yet. We're not going to vote on the whether we're doing an endorsement at all, but if you do endorse, which one would you want to be in this particular case? Who would you want to be endorsed? You may be against, so you could vote for an amendment, for instance, and then vote against the main motion as amended. Okay? Any questions on this? All right? Lines 64 through 66 illustrate a simple but effective pattern for debate. I speak in favor of the amendment. That's the first part. Or you could say, I speak against the amendment. And if it's a motion to postpone, that's also illustrated on the screen. Or if it's a debate on the main motion itself. Whatever fits there. But you're saying you're for it or against, and that's the first thing you do. Next part of this statement, as you can see on line 64 in bold, it says, because. Give a little bullet list of one or more reasons that you are taking your position, and the point isn't just so that other people understand you and feel sorry for you or glad for you. The purpose is to persuade others to your position. And just because you have a position doesn't necessarily convince a lot of folks. Now, some folks may just think, you know, you're God, and they're going to do whatever you do and without knowing why you're doing it. But in most cases, to be very effective in persuading others to your position and to vote the way you'd like them to vote, you need to give them some reasons for doing it. So this is the because. And as short and sweet as you can make it and clear, the longer you go on explaining one of these points, the more likely they're going to have lost what your point is. The third and final part of a model debate speech is to conclude with urging members to vote for or against, whichever you prefer them to do, the thing that is on the floor to vote on next. In this case, it's the amendment. Later on, it could be the main motion. All right? Now, just to make it clear, there's, at any given time, you can think of three groups of people in the room. Those for it, those against it, and those that are in the middle and undecided. Suppose you're for it. So you're just wanting people moving your direction. If you can move someone who's against it into being undecided, you've accomplished something. If you can move someone who's undecided to vote for it, you've accomplished something. And of course, if you can get someone who was against it to vote for it, you've accomplished two things in a sense. So you don't have to necessarily get them all the way over. Even if you got a person from the opposite side to move to abstaining, you've made some victory. And your goal in debate isn't to hear yourself talk or to have others hear yourself talk. It's to persuade others to change their mind on how to vote. All right? We're going to take a second to talk about, we've got 3 more slides before we resume the script. The chair has the job of assigning the floor to the people who want to speak in debate or to make motions to amend, etc. If there's only one person seeking the floor, the chair simply calls on that person. But if there's more than one person that seeks the floor, then the chair has to decide, well, all right, who do I pick? Now, the chair is supposed to remain impartial, so there's some rules for the chair to follow in making the decision. And those rules are to help make sure that they're being impartial. And if they don't follow them, people are going to start thinking they're just picking their favorites. And so it creates ill will and distrust for the chair's fair running of a meeting. So these are the rules that help the chair properly decide amongst the several seeking the floor which to choose. First priority is the maker of the motion gets to speak next, even if they're not the first to stand, seeking recognition at this point, if they have not yet spoken. If they've already spoken once, then that they don't get any more special consideration. First timers get higher priority than the others that have already spoken and now seeking to speak their second time. If those two rules don't accomplish a decision, then the chair needs to alternate between pro and con speakers. If the last speaker in debate was for it or against it, then the opposite would go next, if that helps. If both people are on the same side that just stood to be recognized, that doesn't answer things either. That's when you go to this item, and that is the first to seek recognition, the first to stand. They are the ones that would be recognized. Does that help? A little bit complicated, but they're all sensible, and it's all for fairness. There are 6 steps to handling a motion. Most motions. The motion to approve minutes, for instance, does not have a maker of the motion, doesn't have a seconder, and it doesn't have a vote. But those are 3 of the 6 steps here. The first step is a member makes a motion. Another seconds it. And again, if it's a report from a motion coming out of a committee, you don't need a second. There are some exceptions to some of these rules. The next is the chair states the motion. By the way, let's back up on that one. The chair states the motion for 2 main reasons. First of all, not every motion's in order. If you're having a motion to end debate, well, before you vote on that, someone says, I move to amend the main motion. That motion's not in order at that time. If the motion to end debate, the previous question fails, then that motion could be in order. But sometimes motions are not in order. The chair has a duty to understand what's in order and what's not and when. And so when a motion is made, if it's not in order, the chair has the duty to explain it's not in order, at least at that time. And perhaps give a little coaching that it would be later and explain when and why. But then, if it is in order, it is the chair's duty to state it, even if the chair doesn't like it. And so the stating is communicating to everyone that the chair considers this motion to be in order. That's the first thing stating is accomplishing. The second thing is, up on the front row, Tony makes a motion loud enough for the chair to hear. The chair hears it fine, but back on the back row, is it TJ? TJ couldn't quite hear because he was facing this direction, and TJ is in the back row and didn't hear him. So when the chair states it, the chair is facing everybody, and presumably loud enough so that the back row can hear. And there is a third reason that the chair states the motion. There are lots of members who aren't very experienced in wording motions, and they may word it poorly. And the chair presumably is a little more experienced and might be able to help them by putting it in their proper, to clean it up a little. And it's the way the chair states it, if that's acceptable to the maker of the motion, if it's changed at all, is the way that you process that motion. A real quick example is there's an abuse of the motion to table something. So if you have a motion to buy a new gavel that you're debating, hot and heavy with pro and con, and someone says, I move to table this motion. They just don't want to deal with it. They want to kill the motion rather than just wait to vote on it. There are certain rules about tabling that it's not debatable, and it only takes a majority vote to table it, and then it'll take another majority to take it off the table later. And so it's an effective way to kill things, but it's an abuse of the motion. And so it's perhaps they say, I move to table this to next month's meeting. And table can't specify when it's to be taken back up. The motion to postpone can. So if Tony moved to postpone the motion to buy a new gavel to the next meeting, The chair would then say, it is moved to postpone rather than to table, because that's the right to turn. That'd be an example. So the three reasons why the chair states it, to communicate that the chair considers it an order, to make sure everyone hears it, and to make any necessary corrections in the wording. The fourth step in handling a motion is that the members debate it. And this is generally the longest of the 6 steps, because that can take a lot of debate. Finally, after the debate is over, and the debate ends from generally one of 2 things. No one else is wanting to talk and debate. And then the chair, having said, is there any further debate? Looking around, giving a second for someone to respond. No one does. The chair says, hearing none, we'll vote on the motion now. And then the chair puts it to a vote. Okay? That is illustrated in line 68. Is there further debate? Pause, that's the ... ellipse there. Hearing none, the question is on, and that's putting it to a vote. So the chair puts it to a vote by saying, in this example, line 68, the question is on the adoption of the amendment to strike out George Washington and insert Benjamin Franklin. All in favor say aye, all opposed say no. That is the putting it to a vote. The chair announces the result of the vote on line 74 and following. The ayes have it, the motion is adopted, and the main motion is amended to read that we endorse Benjamin Franklin for State Senate. There's 3 parts to announcing the result. Which side has it, whether it's adopted or lost, and if it's adopted, what the effect is. So every time you process a motion, you should have that announcement, and it should. I've seen lots of meetings where all in favor say aye, all opposed say no. Now it was real clear to everyone which side won, and the chair simply assumes that it's clear enough they don't need to bother with an announcement of the vote results. That's not true. The chair should always give the vote results. They shouldn't just say, I think to themselves, that's obvious, I'll just move to the next motion. Okay? With that, we're going to talk one more slide through and then the main motion. Too often, people think that once you voted on the amend, you've decided the main motion as well. And that's not the case. The sequence would be someone makes a main motion, and during the debate, there's a motion to amend it. Then when you're finished debating it, you vote on the motion to amend, and then you vote on the main motion. If amend failed, then it's the main motion as originally given. But if the amendment passed, then it's the main motion as amended, but you're voting on it. And as I said before, you may be against endorsing anyone, but you'd rather have George Washington than the other way around. You'd prefer Benjamin Franklin, as the script says, and so you'll vote on the amendment, and it gets adopted. But now, even with Benjamin Franklin, you really don't want to go on record as endorsing anyone, so you'll vote against that. Okay? With that said, let's have our role players resume their place. We'll pick up at line 89. Go ahead.
The next business in order is unfinished business and general orders. The motion to hold a workshop on parliamentary procedure on November 5th was postponed to this meeting, and it will be considered at this time. Is there any debate? Hearing none, the question is on the motion to hold a workshop on parliamentary procedure on November 5th. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no.
No.
The noes have it. The motion is not adopted, and we will not hold a workshop on parliamentary procedure on November 5th. The next business in order is new business. Is there any new business? Hearing none, The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Okay. Notice that we talked earlier about the Mrs. Sun 6 categories of business in the standard order of business. The chair's job is to announce each category and each item of business as it comes up. And so there was an announcement, as you saw on line 89, that the next business in order is unfinished business and general orders. That's the category of business. And the chair had, in this case, looked at the minutes of the preceding meeting and looked to see if there was anything postponed, if there was any business that was scheduled but not reached, and all these things. As a result, the chair knew that there was only one thing, and the chair doesn't ask, is there any unfinished business? The chair knew, having properly prepared for the meeting, that there was one item of unfinished business, and the chair simply announces what it is. So, looking at a Mrs. Sun outline, you don't go to a meeting and say, is there any unfinished business? You sure should know and only bring that category up if there is any. In this particular case, this was not an unfinished business, this was a general order. It was something postponed from the previous meeting to this one that made it a general order. The chair doesn't ask for someone to make it or to second it. It was already made and seconded the preceding meeting. The chair is just bringing it back up now for finishing the processing. And having stated the motion again, calls on debate. That's that third step in the 6 steps in processing a motion. Then puts it to a vote. Notice in putting it to the vote, the chair, in announcing the result of the votes on line 99 through 102, actually includes all 3 steps. So it's sometimes optional on a negative vote to explain what the result of the vote is, but the chair, in abundance of desiring to make it clear to everyone where we are, what we just did, said we will not hold a workshop on parliamentary procedure on November 5. Again, on line 104, the chair announces the next category of business, knowing there's no more unfinished business or general orders, and not asking if there is any, simply says the next business in order is new business. And is there any? No one responded. You don't need a motion to adjourn if, after asking if there's any business, new business, or if there's any further new business after you've done one or more items of it, you'd use the word further. Is there any further new business? Then, if no one responds, then this is a business meeting. You're done, and the chair simply declares the meeting is adjourned. You can't declare it adjourned without giving everyone an opportunity to offer their motions of new business, though. So the chair isn't a dictator and say, I'm done, meeting's adjourned. I want to get home. There's only 2 ways to adjourn. Well, 3 if there was a fire. We would adjourn without a vote. The chair would simply say, we've got a fire, we better get out of here, the meeting's adjourned. In the case of no more business, like here, the chair declares it. But if there's more business, any member can make the motion to adjourn, and by a majority vote, that the assembly decides it's time to adjourn. Okay? Now, that completes the, let's see. Oh, we didn't go through all the things on unfinished business and general orders. The unfinished business category includes, that's the U1, unfinished business category 1. There's 3 categories. If there was a motion pending at the preceding meeting and you adjourned in the middle of debate before you voted on it, that was pending when you adjourned, and then that one is going to be the first item here. If at the preceding meeting you had actual general orders business that was scheduled for the meeting that you didn't get to, not only did you perhaps interrupt, adjourn in the middle of processing one motion, but there's some more motions that were scheduled even after it, and you didn't get to them either. That's the second one. The third one, oh, excuse me. Oh, there's two categories of those items that might not have been reached. The first is unfinished business, and the second one is general orders. So at the preceding meeting, either one of those categories, those are U2 and U3. The fourth category here is the general orders, and these are the ones that were postponed from the meeting before it, and that are scheduled now for this meeting. Or they could be part of an adopted agenda. Any questions? That's just getting into the nitty-gritty of what that category includes. Preparing and processing unfinished business and general orders, the chair or secretary makes a list of all the unfinished business and general orders based on the minutes and detailed agenda of the preceding meeting. The chair does not introduce the heading if no items appear. And they don't ask, is there any unfinished business, or is there any, are there any general orders? And then they assume the motion on each. They've already been made. It's already been scheduled. It's obvious that there's at least two people. Normally, the maker and the seconder are the two people that are enough to get business before the assembly. These have already, in one form or another, been had that status of the required interest to bring it before the assembly. So the chair doesn't need someone to make it or to second it. The chair simply assumes the motion. Okay? Clear? There are maybe a few exceptions. But we're not going to get into the details of something like a bylaw amendment and that's been noticed might need to still be made. Okay. We are going to talk about, new business. And new business is not pre-scheduled, but even if it is known in advance, it's not, unless there's been an adopted agenda with that listed, then it's still considered new business. Pre-scheduled stuff is by vote, and that becomes a general order. And printed agenda for adoption. If you print an agenda and you know that this is going to have, if it's your habit to vote on printed agendas, to adopt an agenda before you start your meeting, then don't list things under new business. List them under general orders if you're going to put those headings in like Robert suggests. And the reason is because once it's adopted, they are general orders. If you are sitting out in the audience and you have a new motion, write it out. While someone else is speaking in debate or whatever it is, write out your motion in advance. It is a whole lot more efficient for the meeting if you write it out and sort of edit it yourself rather than just get up with this idea and you start talking and try to edit it orally on the fly. And you don't get it right, and now it needs amending, which is another process to go through with more votes. It's a whole lot better to write it out, maybe even show it to your friend and ask them to review it, your neighbor, and work out as many wrinkles in advance as possible before. It's good to have multiple copies. The copies would go, so there are multi-part carbonless paper forms that people can write things out. And or you can perhaps using technology, other methods of emailing or texting them to the chair or the secretary or the parliamentarian or the projectionist or whatever, however your system works. But if you have a written copy and the chair has a written copy and the secretary has a written copy, it makes things a whole lot easier when you make the motion. Then that you have your copy that you read, the chair has your copy that they can read, the secretary has the copy that they can transfer into the minutes, and if there are any amendments to it, they all have a written copy, they can see where those changes are going. So that's the point here. And the parliamentarian, if you have one, would also want to have a copy. You send to chair, secretary, before the meeting. if you have a meeting next Monday and you have this idea of some business that needs to come up, let the officers know. Let them add it to the agenda. They may have some feedback for you that might help improve it before it's ever presented. And it generally is not a wise thing, a beneficial thing to spring things out of the blue if they can be avoided. It just helps everybody. Any questions on any of those? Okay. We are going to not adjourn, but we're going to talk about adjourning. Adjourning soon, though. I was told this is an hour and a half. Is that right? Okay, that's right. Okay. If there is no further business scheduled, no one offers a new motion under new business, the chair declares the meeting adjourned. You don't need a motion or a vote. And you can move to adjourn even if a motion is pending or more business is on the agenda. If it gets late enough and you don't want to deal with the rest of that business, then you can do that. At the National Association of Parliamentarians biennial convention held weekend before last, there were 30 some odd bylaw amendments offered in advance, and one that wasn't. And some of the ones that were offered in advance, we never got to them. And we adjourned the meeting without ever debating or voting on those motions. Some things just don't get to. It'll be another 2 years before we can do that again. We are not going to take the time right now to practice in triplets because the idea was that we would have you form groups of 3 and role play amongst yourselves. In your group of 3, there would be a chair, someone to make a main motion, and someone make a motion to amend it, and then you could select one of these or make up your own main motion and so forth. With only 9 minutes left to our time, I'm going to skip that. That, however, is a good exercise for you to consider doing in whatever setting you can, because you only learn parliamentary procedure by practicing. And this little exercise is probably one of the most effective ways to practice. Use the script and practice with the script to help you with the right wording. And once you verbalize them yourselves, then it helps you to do it when you're in a live meeting. At this point, with so little time left, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more slides. I can go through more slides, or I can take some questions and answers. So I'm going to ask if you have questions that I haven't addressed so far. And then our final thing is going to be talking about, next meeting will be some advanced topics, finishing the slides and then doing some advanced topics, and I'll ask your requests for your requests on those. But right now, questions and answers. Go ahead.
When you discussed the chair bringing a motion to a vote, you said there were 2 conditions under which a chair could do it. You told us one, and that's no further debate was offered. Then he moved it to
This is the question of adjourning only.
Oh, I thought you were going to QA the whole thing now.
No. The question on adjourning, if the chair has asked, is there any further new business, and no one offers any, the chair declares the meeting adjourned.
Oh, no, I understand that. That wasn't my question.
I misunderstood you. Go ahead.
I thought you were doing a QA now for the course.
I am.
Okay, so I wanted to go back to when the chair takes a motion to a vote, right?
Okay.
You said there were 2 conditions in which he would do that, and you gave us one. And one was no one else came to the mic to offer debate on the motion.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you.
You said there were 2, and you didn't give us the other one. Now, I always thought there were 3, so we're not on the same page on that. But one of them is no one else comes to the mic, there's no further debate, and then chair moves the motion off with a vote. What was the other one?
If the previous question has been called and voted on. So another way it's frequently worded is it's been ordered. So,
Can you restate the question?
Can
you restate the whole dialogue?
Yes, okay. That's poem and so forth, and refer. So with those are ranking motions on the goldenrod sheet on the first chart on the inside. And they have a hierarchy and priority. And so the ones that are lower priority, lower ranking than moving the previous question, none of those would be, if you by 2/3 order the previous question, none of those can be made. You would go immediately to the vote on the pending question. So that's the second way, is by the Assembly ordering that debate and subsidiary motions be ended and to proceed to the vote on the pending question. The third, are you thinking of a third?
Well, now that I hear you talk, we were talking about the same thing, and that's calling for the question.
Yes.
When
Okay.
you call for the question, the chair can exercise discretion. Let's say there hasn't been enough debate.
The chair doesn't have any discretion, quite frankly.
Well, what I've understood is that you have to have a minimum of three during the debate. There's got to be a minimum of 3 pros and 3 cons. So if you call for the question and people don't believe there's been enough debate, they can choose not to end
Well,
debate.
let's make it clear. Every group has the right to adopt what are called special rules of order that will supersede the Roberts Rules of Order.
Oh.
And you can adopt permanent ongoing application special rules of order for your group, or you could put such things even in your bylaws. And those can include things like speeches and debate are limited to 5 minutes, not 10. And the 5-minute rule would supersede the 10-minute rule limit for debate speeches that Roberts has. You could also put in there that on any motion where there are people wanting to debate, there will be opportunity for at least 3 on each side. But that would be a special rule of order. We're just talking about Robert's Rules of Order in this class. You'd have to check your rules to see if you have a rule about 3 people speaking in debate, but it's not in Roberts.
Oh, okay, because that's what was understood, that it was.
There's nothing in Roberts on allowing 3 people, or the chair having any leeway. The chair has got rules to follow just like everyone else, and the rule is that as long as the people are wanting to debate, they get to, but they only get to speak twice on a given motion. So they don't get to come up a 3rd time without permission of the Assembly. So they can speak twice, and they can speak their 2nd time only if there's no one else trying to at that same time speak their 1st time. So if someone, is there any further debate, someone who's already spoken gets up to speak again, no one else is getting up. You don't need to ask, well, that person's wanting to speak a 2nd time, is there someone else wants to speak their 1st? You don't need to ask that. There's no one else standing. So you just call on that person, they get to speak a 2nd time. Even if there's some others that want to speak, they haven't said so by standing or raising their hand. So, but after no one's wanting to speak, or excuse me, as long as there are people who want to speak, they get to speak unless they've spoken twice already. And it can go on for hours if that's what the group wants to do. But at some point, someone's probably going to move the previous question, and the previous question can be actually offered, way before 3 people on either side have spoken. And once the thing is, it takes a 2/3 vote of the Assembly to say, yeah, we want to end debate now. We don't want to hear anymore. And it could easily be someone's wanting to take their full 10 minutes to talk and debate, and it's unnecessary. Emotion's widely popular. It's going to pass. You don't need to spend 10 minutes listening to someone speak and debate. So that would be the way it would normally work.
Oh, thanks for the clarification.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. So we're going to go to the last slide, which has a list of advanced topic ideas. I want you to look over the list and tell me if you have, you can see some of the stuff that we aren't going to deal with today for lack of time, but we'll try to get to. Did I already go past it? Nope, there it is. Let's go back to this one. So the advanced class for this in Tukwila will be October the 17th at 5 p.m. here in Tukwila. And some advanced class possible topics. Look that over. See if there's one or two you would like to request that we consider at the October session. And then if you make any suggestions, be sure you make an effort to attend. And if you know you can't attend, then let us know that when you make your suggestions so we know that it's a lower priority. All right? Any particular preferences on the things that we discuss in more detail?
I don't see any myself.
And this is just my prompting list. If you have other ideas of what you want to cover in an advanced class, let me know. Yes?
Electronic meetings
E-meetings.
and voting anomalies.
Voting what?
Anomalies?
Voting anomalies.
Yeah, we never have that here, but it'd be explored.
I'd say we do have, we just don't call it that.
Okay. Yes?
Removing officers and discipline.
Removing officers and discipline. Okay? Yes?
Elections.
What?
Elections.
Elections. Okay? Any, yes?
Minutes.
Okay. Any others? Minutes was mentioned, by the way. So far we have minutes, elections, discipline, removing officers, and in column 2, voting anomalies and electronic meetings. Anything else? All right, well that's probably more than enough. Let's see. It's 6:32. We started a little late. We're ending a little late, but I think we kept it within a total of 90 minutes. In closing, those that would like to contact me for any reason, those are some of my websites. The first one has my email and phone number, contact info. The handout itself at the very beginning has most of that same information, lines 5 through 9. With that, thank you so much, and I think we're adjourned for today's session. Thank you.
Thank you.